Chapter 9. Toscana. Then I'm coming with you, Will said impulsively. Holt smiled to himself at the instant response. He had expected no less of his former apprentice. Horace, after all, was Will's best friend. They had grown up together, fought side by side, and saved each other's lives on numerous occasions. Evelyn favoured Will with a warm smile as well. "I was sure you'd say that," she said. "My father gave me permission to ask for your help on this mission, but I told him there'd be no need to ask. Thanks, Will. I'll feel a lot more confident with you by my side." "Of course I'll come too," Holt said, then added with a raised eyebrow, "That's if I'm needed." "Lady Pauline said you'd say that," Evelyn told him. "She said you should go with her blessing." Will glanced quickly at his mentor, not sure how Holt would react to the assumption that he needed Lady Pauline's permission to join the expedition. The Holt he knew of old would have come up with some pithy reply to the effect that he was quite capable of making his own decisions. Thank you very much. He was a little surprised to see Holt smile fondly at Evelyn's words. "Well, that's a relief," Holt said, without the slightest trace of irony. Now it was Will's turn to raise an eyebrow, an expression he had studiously copied from Holt over the years. Things had changed, he thought. Alice cleared her throat nervously, and they turned to look at her. There was a bright spot of colour in each of her cheeks. "I'd like to come too," she said. "Horace is one of my oldest friends. He helped Will rescue me from Castle Mackendor, and I owe him for that. Besides, you'll need someone who can speak Nihon-Ja." The words were phrased as a suggestion, but her tone left no doubt that they were a firm statement of intent. She wasn't asking permission. She was telling Evelyn that she wasn't letting her go swanning off to the other side of the world with Will. Not this time. "Yes, Lady Pauline said you'd say that too," Evelyn said dryly. She wished she could reassure the tall girl that she had no designs on Will other than friendship. She could see that Alice could be a valuable friend and ally to her, not just in this case, but in the years to come, and she wished there was some way she could break down the barrier between them. Maybe this journey might give her the opportunity. Holt thought it might be best if he stepped in. "It sounds like a good idea to me," he said. "Alice is a handy person to have around." Alice remained flushed. She had been prepared to argue the point and hadn't expected Evelyn to give in so easily. At the back of her mind, a small doubt formed. Maybe she had been judging Evelyn too harshly. But she forgot the thought as Will asked her a question. "Do you speak Nihon-Ja? When did you learn?" She shrugged, feeling her pulse settle back to normal now that there was no longer any question about her accompanying the party. "I've been studying the language for a year or so," she replied, "mostly using George's translations. I'm not fluent, but I can get by." Will raised both eyebrows. "Well, you learn a new thing every day," he said reflectively. "In your case, that's no exaggeration," Holt said, completely straight-faced. Will pursed his lips in annoyance. He'd have to learn not to give Holt openings like that, he thought. Then another question occurred to his grasshopper mind, and he turned to Evelyn. "How do we get there? How did you get here, by the way?" He heard Holt's deep sigh, and he knew he'd done it again. "Do you ever," the older ranger said, with great deliberation, "manage to ask just one question at a time? Or does it always have to be multiple choice with you?" Will looked at him in surprise. "Do I do that?" he asked. "Are you sure?" Holt said nothing. He raised his hands in a "see what I mean" gesture and appealed to the others in the room. Selathan was amused by the byplay between the two. And, since the enjoyment of this sort of obscure, trivial debate was very much part of the Aridi character, he couldn't help himself. He had to join in. "Halt," he said. "I could be wrong, but I think you were just guilty of the same fault. I'm sure I heard you ask 2 questions just then." "Thank you for pointing that out, Lord Selathen," Holt said with icy formality. Will grinned at the Wakir, who gravely inclined his head to Holt. Then Will remembered that Evelyn hadn't answered either of his questions. "So, how did you get here?" he reminded her. "I used the Scandian duty ship," she told him. The treaty between Araluen and Scandia had been in force for some years now and was regularly updated. One of the latest clauses stationed a Scandian Wolfship each year at a base on the coast of Araluen, with its crew at the disposal of the Araluen king. Since Wolfships were among the fastest craft in the world, it was a valuable addition. In return, King Duncan paid a fee to Scandia and granted favourable trading terms to other Wolfships seeking to buy water, firewood, and provisions. In reply to other nations like Iberion and Gallica, who complained that Duncan was helping the Scandians to raid their coastlines, the king merely shrugged. "No system is perfect," he'd say, "and besides, they could always pay the Scandians not to raid." Which, of course, was true. "I imagine we'll take the Wolfship on to Nihon-Ja," Holt said. Evelyn nodded. "My father has given permission for that. It'll be faster than any commercial vessel we could charter. And besides, Gundar is eager to see Nihon-Ja. He'd be the first Scandian to visit there." "Gundar?" Will said. It was a fairly common name among Scandians, he knew, but he couldn't help hoping that it was an old friend. Evelyn was already nodding. "Yes, it's Gundar Hardstrikers' ship. He's eager to see you and Alice again, and he has a crewman who said nothing would stop him from rescuing the general. I assume he means Horace." Will and Alice exchanged amused glances. "Yes, that's what Gundar's crew call Horace. Sounds as if Nils is still with him," Will said. "He'll be a handy person to have along," Alice put in, recalling Nils Ropehander's massive build and ferocious skill with a battle axe. "Any Scandian is handy to have around if there's a fight in the offing," Holt said. Then, changing the subject, he turned to Evelyn. "Is there any need for you to present yourself to the Toscan Emperor's court? Do you have any official duties to attend to?" Evelyn shook her head. "Officially, I'm not here. That's why I'm travelling as the Lady Evelyn. So no, I'm free to come and go." "Then I suggest we go, and as soon as possible. We've already made our official goodbyes. We'll get a good night's sleep and get down to the docks first thing in the morning." "You can take my room, Lady Evelyn. I'll sleep on one of the couches," Alice said quickly, but Evelyn shook her head. "We'll share the room, Alice," she said firmly. "I don't want any special privileges. We may as well get used to it. A Wolfship is too small for all that nonsense." Alice was astute enough to recognize an olive branch when she saw one. She smiled at Evelyn, a genuine smile for the first time. "It'll be my pleasure to share with you," she said. The others had risen now, and Selathen shook hands with them all as he bade them farewell. "Good luck to you," he said. Then he added, a little wistfully, "It sounds like an interesting trip. I'm tempted to join you. Horace is a friend of mine as well, but—" He made a graceful hand gesture, dismissing the idea. Holt nodded. "You'd be welcome to join us any time, Selathen, but you have your own duties to attend to. We understand." Selathen made the Aridi gesture of greeting and farewell, touching his hand to mouth, brow, and mouth again. "Yes," he said finally, "I have my duty, and it's a hard mistress. But, as I say, I am tempted." He smiled at them all, and left to return to his own quarters. They arrived at the docks just after first light. Gundar's wolfship, named Wolf-Will in Will's honour, was moored alongside the jetty. Will frowned as he caught his first sight of her. He'd seen the ship when she'd been launched, but now there was something different about her. "Something looks odd," he said thoughtfully. Holt was studying the ship too. "Have they moved the mast?" he asked of no one in particular. "It seems a little further aft than I remember." "And where's the crosstree?" Will asked. Normally, the square-rigged crosstree was set 7/8 of the way up the mast, with the big square sail brailed up on it when in port. Wolf-Will's mast was bare, aside from a complicated arrangement of rigging at the masthead, and what looked to be a pair of carefully rolled sails lying fore and aft on the deck at its base. "All I know," Evelyn said, "is that it's the fastest ship I've ever sailed on. Look, here comes Gundar." "You can ask him." She pointed to where a familiar figure, huge as all Scandians were, was rolling in his seaman's walk along the jetty towards them. "Will treaty!" he bellowed, startling the gulls for a 50-metre radius into squawking, screeching flight. Will braced himself as the huge figure approached. He knew what was coming, but there was little he could do about it. Sure enough, Gundar swept him off his feet in a breath-draining bear hug. Will could only grunt a greeting as he felt his ribs on the verge of giving way. "Gorlog's beard, boy, it's good to see you. I hoped we'd run across each other when Iraq assigned us the duty ship. How have you been? What have you been up to?" "Let's go and I'll try tell you," Will managed to grunt breathlessly. Finally, Gundar set him down. Will staggered as Gundar released him, and his friends were a little alarmed at the groaning intake of breath that was Will's first, reflexive response as his emptied lungs desperately sucked air back in. Then, sighting Alice, the huge seafarer seized her hand in one of his enormous fists and planted a smacking, clumsy kiss on it. "Lady Alice," he boomed, "how can you have grown more beautiful than you were?" Evelyn, it has to be admitted, pouted a little at this. Gundar had never commented on her looks, and she was aware that alongside the elegant blonde girl, she was a little tomboyish. Alice was grinning delightedly at him. "Ah, Gundar, I see you haven't lost any of your courtly charm. You'd turn a girl's head with that silver tongue of yours." He beamed at her, then turned his attention to the grey-bearded, slightly built figure standing behind her. "And you must be the famous Holt," he said. "I expected someone a little larger," he added, half to himself as he advanced. Holt, experienced in the ways of Scandians, retreated at the same pace. "Yes, I'm Holt," he said, "and I need all my ribs intact, thank you very much." "Of course you do." Instead of bear-hugging Holt, Gundar contented himself with a firm, manly handshake. Holt's eyes glazed as he felt his fingers and knuckles crushed inside the island-sized fist. He shook his hand painfully as Gundar finally released it. "Any friend of Iraq's is a friend of mine." Gundar glanced around curiously. "But where's that shaggy pony of yours, Will?" "We left our horses in Araluen," Will told him. Since the trip had been intended as a brief 10-day mission to the Toscan capital, there had been no good reason to bring Tug and Abelard. They had been left in the care of old Bob, the Ranger Corps horse breeder. Now, Will wasn't sure if he regretted that decision or not. He'd like to have Tug with him, but the sea journey to Nihon-Ja would be a long one, far longer than any Tug had undertaken before. There would be little chance of going ashore to exercise the horses, and he wasn't sure how they would have coped. Similarly, Ebony, Will's dog, had been left behind with Lady Pauline. Ebony was only half trained, and he felt her boisterous behaviour might cause problems with the rather starchy Toscan officials. Gundar nodded vaguely. He had no idea of the soul-searching that had gone on with the two rangers before they decided to leave their horses behind. He glanced up at the key. "And who's this Lenny Longshanks?" he said. "Is he with you?" The four Araluens turned quickly to look back up the jetty. Striding purposefully towards them, a pack slung over one shoulder, was a tall, slender figure. "Temptation got too strong," Selathan told them as he came closer. "I decided to come with you."